Hi, and welcome to our monthly webinar series where we present a variety of topics that directly influence your business. My name is Charles. I'm Director of Business and Development at iTernal Networks. Just give you a heads up for those who may be joining us for the first time. iTernal Networks is a cybersecurity focused IT company that has helped other businesses improve their ability to manage their threats to their network. As a heads up, we are muting everyone for the purpose of the webinar, but we really do enjoy your participation in our polls and in the Q&A. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. There will be a raffle during the discussion, and so please stay for the entirety of the webinar. Now, if you guys have been watching the news lately, you've probably heard of the critical breaches in cybersecurity occurring over the last year. The state of cybersecurity has changed, and that's why we are putting this webinar together for you, to just some of the latest headlines and what you can do to stay safe. I'm joined with Michael Kanet, founder of iTernal Networks, who will conduct today's webinar. Mike, I'm excited to see what you have for today's viewers.
Thanks, Charles. I'm going to share my screen here.
Sure.
Let me know if you guys. Is that showing up now, Charles?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for the introduction. So as Charles said, I'm Michael Kanet. I'm the owner and founder of iTernal Networks. We were founded just over almost 12 years ago now. And our goal is to become the premier IT service provider in the state of Nevada, recently expanding up into the Reno market. So I rather than go a little bit more into our background, I've got a lot of content to cover today. So I'm just going to dive right in here and what we're going to be discussing. We will leave plenty of time at the end for question and answer. So if you have any questions of anything as we go, please throw those in the chat or in the Q&A here on Zoom. So we're going to be talking about, to start off with, a few definitions. I want to make sure that as we discuss these vulnerabilities and attacks, that there's a clear understanding on some of the terminology that we'll be using, and then we'll be talking about these two cybersecurity things that have been in the news the last few weeks: Microsoft Print Nightmare and the Kaseya VSA attack. And we're going to wrap it all up with how you can protect your business. So first, I want to talk about a supply chain attack. If you've been following the Kaseya VSA attack at all, you've probably heard this mentioned in the news. And what a supply chain attack is: an intrusion through a third-party compromise. So essentially, it involves somebody implanting something malicious. Could be code, hardware, in the manufacturing process. It could be a durable good inserted into the manufacturing chain of a single product. And the purpose is to leverage existing trust between that vendor and the end users and bypass some of the security mechanisms in place. It's highly valuable to hackers because it allows them to access otherwise hardened targets and gain a significant number of potential victims out of just a single operation. So the screen grab that you've got there on the presentation is an example using a program, right? So you've got legitimate source code that a software vendor writes, and at some point in that build process, a hacker could introduce malware into that code, so that when the update or that new installation gets pushed out, that malware gets pushed out to customers at the same time, thereby getting installed on victims' computers, reporting back to the criminal organization or the criminals, and allowing them to basically do whatever they want with those systems. So that's one type of attack we'll be discussing a little bit later on. Vulnerability. I want to make sure you guys understand what a vulnerability is. So this definition comes from NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And according to NIST, a vulnerability is a weakness in an information system security procedures, internal controls, or implementation that could be exploited or triggered by a threat source. And one specific type of vulnerability is a zero-day vulnerability. And that's a type of computer software vulnerability that's unknown to the vendor of the target software at the time that attacks start commencing on that. Next is a SQL injection. This is a specific type of attack using vulnerability in SQL. So SQL is a programming language designed to manage large amounts of data with databases. And using techniques that hackers use for SQL injection allows them to take control and inject a query to allow them to gain access to sensitive information. It could be usernames, passwords, it could be end user data, it could be healthcare information, depending on what that database contains. And it can allow them to, gain access to systems and information that they should not have access to. Finally, ransomware. I'm sure you guys have heard lots about ransomware. This is a screenshot of the WannaCry ransomware that was released in 2017 and quickly infected over 300,000 computers worldwide. Ransomware is a type of malware that criminals use to encrypt the data on your computers and anything connected to them, and essentially hold your data ransom. It's spread through phishing emails, infected websites, and through other hacking attacks, such as SQL injection that we just talked about. And the only way to recover is to wipe your system and recover from a backup or pay the ransom. We do not recommend paying the ransom. The FBI does not recommend it. All that does is further fund these criminal organizations to continue to wreak havoc around the world. So with those definitions aside, we now are going to quickly talk about Microsoft Print Nightmare. These are some of the headlines. If you do a quick search online, you can probably find lots more. So this was a very public, very known about the last month or so. And what it is Print Nightmare is a specific vulnerability that affects Windows, all versions of Windows, because it affects the Microsoft Print Spooler, which is a service that allows your computer to print. And so this vulnerability allows remote code execution to perform privileged file operations, essentially allowing an attacker to run code with system or admin level privileges. They could then install programs, view, change, delete data, create new accounts with full user rights, etc. Microsoft confirmed that this vulnerability has been in use in the wild, meaning that it's actively being exploited by criminals. Microsoft quickly released a patch on July 6th, and they included with that patch some information to double check to make sure that your system is safe even after the patch. If your system was attacked at all using that vulnerability, some system settings might be changed to still leave your system open to additional attacks through that vulnerability. And if anybody's interested, we can provide a link to Microsoft's article that talks about those things that you can do to make sure that you're safe from that. The most important thing is to make sure that all your Microsoft updates are installed, including the one that was released July 6th for this specific type of vulnerability. All right, we now have a poll question. Ariana, if you want to throw that up on there so everybody can respond. So the question is, have you heard about the Kaseya VSA attack? Now, you probably have heard about it in some way, shape, or form, but if you could answer according to the most appropriate for you. We'll wait a few seconds here to get everybody's responses. All right, looks like about almost 70% have heard about it with my webinar promotions. A handful, 30% or so, have read a little bit about it or seen about it in the news, and there's a couple stragglers there that haven't heard much about it. So we're gonna go into a pretty, I don't want to go too deep and bore you guys, but we're gonna go into what this attack was and how it started, how it kind of played out. Here's one headline from an online blog, Tech Radar Pro. There's literally, I saw it featured on CNN. I had a client email us with a link to a CNN article about it, saying, hey, what's going on with this? So it was definitely big news for a little while. And what happened? Kaseya is I would say they're an industry leader in information technology management software. So their software allows IT departments and IT service providers to manage large numbers of computers, to execute scripts, commands, updates, all kinds of stuff while monitoring those systems. And on July 2nd, there was an attack on the Kaseya VSA software on-premise servers that was initiated by the criminal organization REvil. REvil is based in the Soviet bloc countries. It's unknown exactly where they're at, but they are somewhere in one of those Russian nations. And they've been known about for a while. They've initiated some other ransomware attacks earlier this year and last year. And on July 2nd, they attacked on-premise servers, meaning servers that were not being hosted in the cloud by Kaseya. So they sold software to other companies who installed it and ran it from their own systems. It's unknown the exact numbers. Anywhere from 50 to 60 different organizations had their Kaseya VSA servers hacked, which affected between 800 and 1,500 businesses around the world. One estimate put the total number of endpoint computers and servers that were affected by this, that were impacted with ransomware, around 1 million. It can be verified. A lot of these businesses have kept the information very private. They're privately owned companies. They have not had to publicly disclose it. But we do know that victims are found in 17 different countries around the globe. Many of the reports on this attack initially said that it was a supply chain attack. We talked about supply chain attacks, that in code being inserted into software and then passed out to the end users. Kaseya has since come out and said, no, it was not a supply chain attack. Nothing in their code was changed or manipulated or inserted. What it was a zero-day attack. So it was a vulnerability that Kaseya claims was unknown to them at the time that the attacks commenced. There's some questions on whether it was a true zero-day. There's a Dutch institute that we'll talk about in a minute that claims that they let them know about it in April, about this vulnerability. So there may be some culpability and liability on Kaseya's part for not patching this quick enough. Once the breach was discovered, July 2nd, Kaseya immediately shut down all their cloud-based servers and recommended all their customers shut down their servers as well to keep them safe. The CISA and the FBI, CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the FBI released a document providing guidance to MSPs and end customers that were affected by this. That happened on July 4th. July 4th, the White House also confirmed that they were working with the FBI and with Kaseya to try and figure out the scope of this attack. In fact, it was reported that Biden said that if it was found that the Kremlin was involved in covering up or protecting this organization, that there would be some consequences for Russia. Nothing's come from that I know of, but definitely a lot of involvement at the government level with this. The organization REvil, the criminals were demanding ransoms up to $5 million initially for all of the customers. Some of the smaller organizations, 150,000 all the way up to 5 million. After several days, they posted on the dark web that for 70 million, they would release a universal decryptor that would be able to be used by all the victims of their software. It's unknown how many organizations paid the ransom, or if any did pay the ransom. Kaseya began patching their software on July 11th. So 9 days after, and bringing systems back online by the 12th. The Dutch Institute of Technology reported that they notified Kaseya back in April of 2021 about this vulnerability. And they reported that Kaseya was responsive and began working on patching it. But what we know is that it wasn't fully patched. As more information has come out, we found that it was a SQL injection attack. So there was a vulnerability on the database server that allowed the hackers to insert information into the database on those servers, gaining access to them. One of the first things they did is lock out the system administrator so that the companies would not be able to go in and essentially lock out the attackers without shutting down their systems. So, now that we know a little bit more about it, the attack, the scope of it, I mean, this literally affected thousands of companies around the globe. And for many of them, this was kind of a worst case scenario for them. A Swedish grocery chain had to close 800 of their stores for over 2 days to recover because their systems were affected by ransomware and they had to reload everything. So this really is, this example is a great great case to look at to see what happened, and then to analyze, what can you do to keep your business safe. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about, is how to protect your organization and your business with all these security breaches and vulnerabilities and kind of the scary state of the world with cybersecurity around us. So I'm going to talk, I'm going to start off by talking about the basics that we recommend, that other cybersecurity experts recommend to protect your business. Now, I'm not going to go into a ton of details on these. You've probably heard about many of these. Hopefully you're implementing many of these already within your organization. The first is the patching policy, right? So Microsoft announced there's this vulnerability, Print Nightmare. And within a couple of weeks of announcing it, that it had been discovered, they had a patch for it. And if you had a patch policy in place to deploy that critical patch within days, you were then protected from that vulnerability. Moving forward, if you don't have a patching policy in place, you could still be exposed. Your patching policy should include, how frequently you do updates. Do you do critical updates, important updates? At what level of updates get approved and pushed out to systems? And it should also include, in addition to Microsoft and Apple operating system updates, it should also include third-party apps such as Java, Adobe products, your web browsers, and other programs that you have on your systems. The next thing we recommend is a next-gen firewall with IPS, which stands for Intrusion Prevention System. If you don't have an active subscription from the firewall vendor, and what that subscription includes is, the intrusion prevention definitions, antivirus policies, other policies that get updates regularly from that security vendor to make sure you're protected from the latest known threats. If you don't have that and you're not paying for that, then you probably want to reevaluate whether the firewall that you have is the right firewall for your business. I'll also point out, we see this quite frequently when we go in and do IT security assessments for smaller companies. We see that they're using the internet router modem combination that's provided by the internet service provider. That is not sufficient to provide security for your business. And if that's what you have in place, we highly recommend talking with a security professional to get a business class firewall. And I'm not talking about, one of the wireless routers at Best Buy either. Those do not have the business class protection that we recommend. Next is endpoint protection with ransomware protection. If you just have basic antivirus or a free antivirus, that's not going to cut it in today's world. You need to have one of these advanced systems that includes protection from ransomware threats. I saw a demo just this last week of Sophos, where they actually showed the exact code used in the Kaseya attack running on one of their systems with Sophos, and how it not only detected it but blocked it and reversed the initial files that were impacted by the ransomware. So if you don't have the right level of protection, you leave yourself open to these type of attacks. Email security. This one, everybody probably already has this in some shape or form, but make sure you're filtering what's coming in and going out of your business so that, some of these security risks are not getting through to the inboxes. One of the top ways these criminals are getting in is through phishing. So if you don't have some sort of phishing protection and phishing training in your organization, that should also be implemented. Help your end users recognize what a phishing email looks like, and implement some software that scans for and removes those phishing emails as they come in or before they come in. And finally, a VPN. If you're accessing your systems remotely, make sure you have a VPN or some sort of encrypted connection to be able to access those systems so that you're not exposing any of that information to the public web. All right, so that's the kind of what we consider the bare minimum. That's the starting point. But you may wonder, like, oh, well, I'm already doing all those things. Is there anything else? But yes, there are some other things that we'll talk about now. And to me, these are the more exciting things, because these are the things that can really increase your cyber resilience of your organization, your ability to prevent, detect, and react and respond if there is anything that happens. So we're going to go into a little bit more on that. The first thing is vendor management. This Kaseya attack is a perfect example of this, right? So Kaseya is a vendor of many organizations around the globe. I think Kaseya reported with this hack that they have over 37,000 customers using their software. So while it was a small number that were affected, it affected a lot of individuals. And so, it's important that you, as you work with vendors, such as, these other IT providers working with Kaseya, that you're evaluating a couple of different things with them, right? So you need to be asking, like, does this vendor have access to sensitive data? Does it have employee data? Does it have customer data? Are they hosting that data? Do I have access? Is it on my systems and they just have remote access to it? How much control do they have over that sensitive data? The second question you should ask is, are they critical to your operations, and how critical? If they're down, can you still operate? Can you replace them quickly if needed? If you're using QuickBooks Online and for one reason or another, Intuit gets attacked and their systems are down, does that completely take you down? Some of your employees, department, how is that going to impact you? And evaluate that across all your vendors, right? Some of your vendors you're going to find are more critical than others. Maybe they're critical because of the data they have. Maybe they're critical because you need them to operate each day. And after asking yourself these questions, then it's important to look at that vendor individually and ask some additional questions, right? Do they have to meet any compliance requirements? If you're a healthcare, do they meet HIPAA? Are they protecting your data and meeting all the HIPAA compliance requirements necessary? If it's your merchant vendor, right? Are they PCI compliant? Do they have any other certifications? Do they have SOC 2? Are they ISO 27001? Do they have any certifications proving that they've met specific requirements with their cybersecurity? You should look at those and see if they have those. And if not, maybe look at other vendors that do have those things. You should look and see, were they involved in any previous breaches? And if so, how did they respond, right? I mean, if they had a previous breach, that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't work with them, but that gives you a glimpse into what might happen if there's another breach, right? How quickly did they react? Were they able to get systems back online quickly? Were they able to minimize exposure? How do they respond to vulnerabilities, right? If it's a software vendor you're working with, how quickly do they patch their software and push out updates and notify you of potential vulnerabilities within their systems to make sure that you're protected? And I would say, get it in writing, right? I mean, we've all dealt with salespeople that have told us one thing, and then after we buy the product, we find out, no, that wasn't entirely true. So make sure it's in writing, right? If the salesperson says, oh yeah, we've met this compliance requirement and we've never had a breach and this is our response team and all these processes are in place, get it in writing so that you have some sort of proof that the company's going to stand behind what that salesperson told you. And then finally, be proactive. If you're reading about stuff in the news and you have concerns, reach out to that vendor and say, hey, I'm concerned about ransomware and all these latest threats. What do you do to protect me and my systems and my data? And work with them. The next thing is align with NIST. So I mentioned them a little earlier. I shared a quote from them in the definition. So once again, they're the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're a part of the government, and they've created a set of controls, a cybersecurity framework that helps companies and organizations to manage and reduce their cybersecurity risk. And if everybody's probably heard of PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance and some of these other requirements, pretty much all of those other compliance requirements start off with evaluating this cybersecurity framework and then build on top of that. NIST states the following in regards to their framework. They say that the framework enables organizations, regardless of size, degree of cybersecurity risk, or cybersecurity sophistication, to apply the principles and best practices of risk management and improving the security and resilience of critical infrastructure. Now, NIST, their main goal is to increase the cybersecurity of the nation. And there's only so much they can do because the nation's made up of millions of individuals and individual organizations. But they have done an amazing job of putting together documentation and a structure that can help organizations of every size increase their cybersecurity resilience. The framework is purposefully designed to be flexible since every business is a little bit different. every business they have different threats, different risk tolerances, different vulnerabilities, and they can take this framework and apply it in a way that meets their needs and helps them increase their cyber resilience and reduce their risk. And as you apply the framework, your business will advance. They call them tiers: tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tier 4 being the most advanced. They call it adaptive, meaning that you have continuous processes and procedures in place to be aware of and improving your cybersecurity throughout your organization. It becomes a part of your culture, essentially. Tier 1 is partial. So as you get started applying this, you're going to be partial, right? You're going to be like, well, we're working on it. We're partially identifying things, we're partially protecting things, and then you'll work up to risk informed, where it's like, okay, well, we're informed of all these things, our organization's aware of them, and we're working towards those higher tiers. If you're not, if you apply this and you don't get to tier 4, that's okay, right? I mean, the important thing is that you're making steps towards increasing your cybersecurity resilience, and you're reducing your risk. And I would suggest also, going back to previous slides about vendors that you work with, ask them if they follow the CIST cybersecurity framework and what processes they have in place to increase their cyber resilience. If you want to learn more about NIST, I'm more than happy to talk about it. We're working on applying it to our business and to our clients' organizations, and you can learn more about it through us, or you can reach out to NIST direct by going to nist.gov, and they've got lots of great resources on there. Which brings me to my next poll question. Ariana, if you want to throw that up on there. Just curious if your organization has a cybersecurity framework. It could be NIST, or maybe it's something you guys built internally with your organization to increase your cyber resilience. We'll give a little bit longer here for people to respond. Oh, this is great. A lot more people are responding, yes, we follow a cybersecurity framework than I anticipated. So that's excellent. Looks like we got about half that do, 38% that don't, and the final 13% aren't sure if their organization does or not. So that's great. I'm really glad to hear that many of you are already working on some sort of cybersecurity framework. So that's awesome. That can definitely work to improve your business's cybersecurity resilience. All right, next topic, zero trust. And this is one that I could probably have another hour-long webinar on, just to talk about zero trust. So, back in the day, hackers, there's probably jokes you've heard about, hackers being, holed up in their basements, living with their mom still. That's not really the case, right? Hackers are professionals. They're now working high-rise buildings in countries like Russia, with HR departments and CEOs and accounting teams. They're all supporting floors and floors of professional hackers that are trying to break into businesses around the globe. And so, in the past, we used to operate on the philosophy of let's keep the hackers out. But things have changed. We can't necessarily guarantee that we're going to keep them out, because all it takes is an end user clicking on a Hallmark greeting card that they got from their long lost aunt, or somebody trying to accept the inheritance from their Nigerian prince uncle, right? So the end users, most of the breaches happen from something that an end user does, despite all the security that we put in place. And so that's where zero trust philosophy comes in. With zero trust, we act like the hackers already have access to your network, and that we need to secure things internally as well as externally. A user or device on the network should never have free reign just because they connected. You need to be able to verify the device, to verify the application, verify the user, and so that they're trusted. It's a much more secure approach to handling your data security. The whole thought is, by default, trust no person and no device until verified. And multi-factor authentication and other security tools can come into play with this. This is definitely a more advanced technique to securing your network, but it's also one of the most secure ways of doing it. So, like I said, this is something that you can go read more about. I love talking about this topic and others. If you have questions, please reach out. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to go through it on this webinar. Next, work towards standards. We have what we call a recommended technology platform within our organization with our clients, and that's standardizing on which software, what hardware, what security tools, et cetera, are in use. And by doing that, it makes it a lot easier to make sure they're secure. By knowing that all of the users use Firefox or Chrome, you can make sure that those browsers are patched and updated and secured. But if you have random users that are using Opera or other browsers that maybe you don't have controls over, then there's potential opportunities for vulnerabilities in that software. And so standardizing across your technology can help make it easier to manage, update, and secure across all systems. Finally, make sure you've got everything in your control. Make sure you have full ownership of all of your assets. If you've got data that's only stored on a vendor's systems, you probably should evaluate whether you can have a backup or other way of storing some of that data so that you don't lose access should a vendor be breached or should something happen with your systems. And make sure you have access to all of your credentials, your administrative credentials. You should never feel like you're being held hostage by an IT provider that's not allowing you access to your systems if you need it. That being said, you should never be logging into your systems with administrative credentials and working, because that's a good way to break things or cause issues. But having access to it in the case of emergency is a necessity in today's environment. So that's all I've got. Let's see what questions. I know we're probably running a minute or two over, but I want to make sure that we're gonna respond to all of your questions here. So let's see, what have we got? All right, so somebody asked, well, we talked about business class firewalls, and somebody asked what is the cost for that? So that's a great question. We get that one all the time. Really, it depends. It depends on the size of your organization and the speed of your internet, because not all firewalls can process gigabit traffic, right? So if you've got a gigabit fiber connection and 100 users, you're going to need a much more expensive business firewall, because it needs to be able to process all that traffic going through it in real time so it doesn't slow down your internet. If you've got a small office with less than 5 users, your firewall is probably going to be around $500, and your 3-year security license will probably be around another $500, and it goes up from there depending on the size. So if you've got questions on that for your particular business, we can definitely have a conversation after this about your size, number of users, and your internet speeds to determine appropriate size. Let's see, what else have we got? Are there any other questions? Charles or Ariana, did I miss any other questions that popped up on chat?
Yeah, there's a couple more here, but really quickly, I just want to announce our raffle winner.
Oh, I jumped ahead. You're right. It's raffle time.
Yeah, not a problem. So the raffle winner for today is Jeremy. We'll be sending you an email, or we can get in touch with you and send you the gift card. Let's see. So there are some more questions. What option does a company have if we feel a vendor is not secure? I guess the question is more so is what can they do? What can they do with the business owner of that company?
That's a really good question. So I would say, to start off with, if this is a vendor you've been working with for a long period of time and there's a relationship there, then I would suggest reaching out to that vendor and having a conversation with them, right? Be proactive with it. Let them know that you're concerned with security and see if they can answer your questions on what they do to protect your data and your systems. If you don't get the reaction you like, then I would say it's probably time to evaluate other options and take a look at some of the other vendors out there. But just because we're not promoting going out and firing all your vendors because you don't think they're secure. The starting point is always have a conversation and see what you can do to improve it.
That's right. So the second question is, what is the most common way for breach of security to occur?
Well, the more wide answer is end users. I've seen various different reports from different security organizations that rate anywhere from 85 to 95% of breaches come as a direct result of end users. The ones that, like this Kaseya VSA attack, they're not the majority of attacks. The majority of attacks come through phishing, through drive-by downloads on websites, hacked websites and other things, breached credentials of end users. They all initiate from something with an end user. And so that's really where training comes in, training your staff on phishing, training them on how to recognize threats, and just be more cyber aware is a good starting point. But yeah, end users and phishing, more particularly phishing of end users, is where a lot of those breaches come from.
Here's a third question. Assuming my company is hacked by a foreign company in Russia or China, should we report it? Good question.
Yes. The FBI and CISA have mechanisms in place. In fact, I had it in my notes for one of the slides to talk about, and I skipped over it because we're running out of time. But the White House, when they had a press conference last, I guess it was 2 Sundays ago, about this Kaseya attack, they posted on their website a link to where you could go and report it if you were affected by that. So yes, if you're affected by any sort of fraud, online digital fraud or any sort of fraud or ransomware or any type of attacks, you should report that to the FBI and let them know. They have resources that may be able to help depending on the scale of it, but it's important that they know about what's going on so that they can go after those criminals.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that pretty much wraps up our questions. We have a couple more, but we can go over those in a follow-up email. We look like we're running a little bit over. This was great, and I hope that we can cover the rest of your questions via that email. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. You will be receiving, as I said, an email for a follow-up consultation, as well as a link to the recording of this video. If you have any questions about implementing a cybersecurity solution, you can click on that link and we can schedule a strategy session. Let's plan to meet again next month, and until then, stay safe.
Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Absolutely.